Me too.
All right. So today we're going to talk about privilege. We're going to talk about just privilege in general of what it means, but more specifically, what we often hear in society as referred to as white privilege or maybe male privilege or Christian privilege, different examples of privilege. But I know one of the main things that kind of came up for us is in our last conversation, we were talking about how we need to be able to have civil conversations, even if we don't agree with something. And the topic of privilege came up, and we learned that we have some difference in opinion on this, right? Of does white
Absolutely.
privilege exist? Does privilege exist in general in our society? And I thought, what better way to showcase how we can have conversations with different viewpoints than to have one and to show it to people and to really just have this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. I know you shared a little bit beforehand, but you're also kind of excited to have this conversation. So why don't we kick it off?
Perfect. I love it. And you're absolutely right. We've got to have these conversations. So I was telling you before we clicked on, kind of in preparation of this, I wanted to get a bunch of different, because I have my viewpoints,
Right.
right? And everybody's got their viewpoints. That's one of the things
Yep.
about this is everybody has their own way of seeing things, and too often we try and make everybody see it the way we want to see it instead of just going out there. So my way of exploring it, since I have a decent following on social media, was to go out and say, all right, let's talk about white privilege. And I threw it out there, and I loved the feedback that came back. And I put in there in all caps, I put any ugliness, vehemence, whatnot, you're gone. Like, I'm deleting you. Like, this is about good conversation. Because what a boring world this would be if we all agreed. If we didn't have things to talk through, discuss through, and work through, it would just be boring. And it was interesting because there were so many ways of viewing privilege, and especially white privilege and the idea of white privilege, that I hadn't considered. We had, friends of mine that are black. We had friends of mine that were white parents that actually adopted black kids. We had Hispanic people that came straight from Mexico to America, and some that were second generation here, some that were third generation and had grown up here. And everybody had their own way of viewing it. And what I loved is a lot of the comments were very long, and people explained in their lives why they see things the way they chose to see things.
Yeah.
So it's great. I hope if anybody wants to, they can go find my page. It's Ed Cunningham on Facebook, and join in on the discussion there. Again, I won't allow any vehemence, vitriol, or ugliness in there. Have discussions, even the uncomfortable ones. The other interesting part to it is I received several private messages from people who were friends who had great things to add to the conversation, but they were too nervous to do it. And the reason they were
Mm.
nervous is because they were white and they didn't want people to attack them. They're afraid of the whole cancel culture that's out there, and so they were like, "This is my experience, blah blah." And I'm like, "Why don't you post it out?" Oh, because I don't want to get attacked. Because,
Yeah.
and that's the first thing we got to get rid of is that idea of attacking each other when we don't agree.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. I love the idea of opening up a conversation and being really forthright in the beginning of we're not here to throw hatred. We're not here to throw blame. We're here to have a conversation. If you participate in, as you shared, the vitriol or the negativity, then you're out. Like that's not what this conversation is. And that's ultimately what we try to do on a regular basis with us squared. And I know what you also just believe in your personal life and in your aspirations and everything that you do. It's part of who you are as well of we don't have to agree on everything. And like you said, the world would be pretty boring if we did, right? But how can we have those conversations to truly understand each other's perspectives without trying to sway or shift someone's opinion or mind? If our opinions are shifted because of something we hear, then that's up to us to determine, right? And
Right.
I think ultimately a lot of these conversations do end up shifting people's opinions or behaviors because they're brought to light different things that people hadn't thought about before. But we have to have the conversation without guilt or shame or blame to even get to that point. Because as soon as we bring in the finger pointing and the guilt and the blame,
Yeah.
people's defenses go up and they're not going to hear anything you say. And if we don't hear what people are telling us, then we're never going to be able to shift our behaviors.
Right. The minute the defenses go up, the conversation ends. It just
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think the best place to start with this conversation is just defining what privilege is for both of us, because we might have different perceptions of what that even is. And I think in our society, we often have a disagreement about a term or a concept but it's not even a disagreement on the term or the concept. It's a disagreement on the definition of the term, right? So for us, how we determine or define privilege, it doesn't mean that you haven't faced challenges, because I believe that most people in society have faced some kind of challenge, right? It simply means to us that if you have a privilege based on an identity group that you belong to, it means that there's some challenges that maybe you haven't had to face because of that societal perception. So, for example, white privilege is that there might be some challenges that you have not had to face as a white person, right? Or myself as a white person, there's some challenges I have not had to face.
Yeah, I
I'm
definitely
sorry.
believe that's the main definition of white privilege, and I like how you put that, especially since you said there are some challenges you might not have faced. So, like, one
Right.
of the things that came up in the conversations yesterday was, you white people just don't understand what it's like to be racially profiled. And I'm like, you just racially profiled me by saying that as a white person, I've never been racially profiled. I mean, so like, you
Yeah.
can't say that. I got jumped because I was a white guy wearing a cowboy hat, and a bunch of Mexicans figured I was racist and jumped me. Was that racial profiling? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I, as a white person, as a white male, who I have absolutely seen what it's like to be racially profiled, to be prejudiced against. It might look different than it does for a
Hmm.
black man, but
Yeah.
it absolutely is something I've been through. So yeah, I agree with you. Privilege exists.
Hmm.
Nobody in their right mind can deny that there are privileges that exist for all at all different levels for all different
Yeah.
kinds of people. The idea of grouping a whole group of people by their skin color in and of itself is inherently racist. Anytime you group people together and judge them, systemically based off of their skin color, that's racism, no matter who it's perpetuated against. That's my belief on it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I definitely hear you with that. And I agree with the idea that you can definitely be racially profiled no matter what your skin color is, right?
Sure.
And you can be profiled for what gender you are. And the idea of lumping everyone together because they agree or because they're a part of a specific identity is inherently against what both of us stand for, right? We have to look at everyone as individuals. So I think that's really important for us to kind of share with the audience that we might have differences of thought, and there's also some similarities of thought, right? And I think that the only way to understand that there are some similarities of thought is if we enter into the conversation in the first place,
Right.
right? And the other piece that I think we talked a little bit about the last time we talked together was, how do you have those conversations, right? Like when you enter into a conversation, do you go into a conversation with the idea that I'm going to make sure that this person knows that they're wrong,
Right.
right?
And a
Like,
lot of people do.
and a
Yeah.
lot of people go into that, right? They're like, yes, we're about to have a conversation about privilege. I'm going to put Ed in his place, right? No, if we come to the conversation with that personality or that attitude, that's not going to benefit anyone. That's just going to put more fuel on the fire of, see, we can't get along, right?
Right.
And we need to come to the conversation with, hey, we have some different viewpoints, we have some similar viewpoints, but I want to learn more about your viewpoint. And I love that you put it out on Facebook and said, hey, I want to hear your thoughts, right? I want to hear what everyone else in my circle and maybe people outside of your circle, because maybe someone in your circle shared it with their circle,
Yeah.
right? So, what are people in general thinking? What are they feeling? What are their lived experiences? Because I think that's a big piece of it is, if we don't experience something in society, sometimes we put on blinders like, well, if I haven't experienced it, it doesn't exist,
Sure.
right? And it's like, there's going to be some things that you've experienced that I have never experienced. And there's going to be some things that I've experienced that you've never experienced.
Right.
And it doesn't take away either of those lived experiences as invalid just because one of us haven't experienced it.
So I wanted to point out something you said that I loved so far. And this is where I think the key to solving all of this is we have to stop segregating and grouping people into these weird groups. And we've got to start seeing people as individuals. And that's the only way you're going to understand the human experience to a deeper level, is if you do that. Anytime we group people into a group and judge them based off of some weird idea of, this was my experience that happened to me, so now I'm going to judge this entire group. Let's talk about a controversial one: police officers. Are there some bad police officers out there? Absolutely, but I believe there are very, very few of them. And I believe, as having been a firefighter and worked with first responders with my first responder recon company, I've worked with fire departments and police departments all over the United States. And I can tell you the majority of police officers are out there serving for the right reasons. However, the news sensationalizes the few that are bad seeds, right? And then we cast, or not, I'm not going to say we because I'm not part of it, but then people will cast this shade on all police, you know, and then we saw what happened with the rioting and whatnot, and it gets way out of hand. And that's what happens when we start grouping people is we create division, we create, we lose all of our solidarity, and we end up blaming the 90% for what the 10% did.
Right.
10% do. And that's where we kill ourselves as a society when we do that. Sitting down and having these individual conversations and allowing people to see it is huge. And like my grandpa always said, boy, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And you've got to do a lot more listening. That doesn't mean, I think a lot of people fear listening because they think, and it goes back and forth, but they think if I open myself up too much, then I'm going to lose what I already believe. And I'm bound and determined to believe what I believe. And I'm going to prove what I believe rather than open myself up to what is truth. And if we pursue truth, not, I hate that Oprah ever brought up the weird thing of, your truth, live your truth. You know what? That's a crock. That's a crock. That's saying in my belief system, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that my belief system is the correct belief system. It's my truth. No, let go of your ego, have some humility, and pursue actual truth. And have the humility to be willing to let go of the beliefs that you may have that may be false narratives ruling your life in order to reach to something that is more real, something that is higher than where you're at. And that's only going to happen if we can open ourselves up to conversations and not take things personally while we have these disagreeing conversations.
Right. I love the concept of false narratives, right? And what I mean by that is we are often kind of socialized and taught how to behave at a very young age, right? And as we get older, we have the ability to either stay with that or to grow outside of that and grow beyond that. And I think as a society, we need to be able to look in the mirror and say, this is something that I have believed to be true about myself for this long, but does it actually serve me right now?
Yes.
Right? And too often people are afraid to look in the mirror because they're afraid that it could make them look bad. Or as you said, that cancel culture component, right? Of if I show my truth, if I show what I am or who I am, maybe someone won't like that part, right? And we need to be able to be authentic with ourselves because we have been taught some pretty false narratives. And I think all of us have been taught false narratives throughout our lives in different ways, whether it's from our families, from schools, whatever it might be, but we're all impacted by the information we gather. And as children, we absorb and gather so much more information. As adults, we start to build those walls up and say, ooh, that's not information I agree with, so I'm not going to listen to it. Right. But as children, we absorb and hear everything.
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah. What's the most important meal of the day?
Well, that's a whole marketing thing that Kellogg's came up with, but...
Yeah, it's one of the simplest ways to prove exactly what you were saying is almost without fail, almost every person, especially in America, is going to say breakfast. And before Kellogg's launched their spiel to try and sell cornflakes, that was not the truth. The truth was It was like dinner. Not a lot of people had breakfast actually back then, but they were trying so hard. So they created this marketing campaign. And this is where all change starts. And you said it. It starts within. It starts within yourself. It starts within your own pursuit of self-mastery. And this is what I talk, when I speak on podcasts, when I go on, whether it's about relationships or business and whatnot, when I've done mentoring with CEOs about, revamping their company or whatnot, it's always been about starting with that personal growth because everything's a ripple effect from inside in the core. Too many people are trying to fix the issues and the angst within themselves outside of themselves, thinking that if they change the outside and around them and the people around them and gather more people that are like-minded to them, that somehow on the inside that'll relieve that tension and that angst that's in there. But the truth is it starts from the inside and ripples out. And this, I'll give you the quick spiel of what I usually talk about is The Four Agreements, one of my favorite books, absolute favorite books. the gist of it is, inside each one of us is a book of beliefs, or as we refer to them as agreements. You call them agreements because it's empowering to understand that you chose to agree with these things. And once you realize that you're choosing to agree with these beliefs that are written in your book, you also have the power to stop agreeing with them and change them. So as a child, you don't realize you have that permission, or that you gave that permission to your parents, your aunts, your uncles, your siblings, your teachers, marketing firms, to write in your book how you see things and how you believe. And then when you get up to teenage years and your circle grows, you start going, wait a minute, okay, my dad taught me that this is what a dad is, this is what a husband is, this is what a man is. But you start seeing other examples and you start realizing I have a choice in this. Mm-hmm. Those usually come out as rebellious years. Well, people either take one or two roads at that point. They either double down and decide to prove that their book and the things that are written in it is the most correct, or they go, wait a minute, I'm going to start finding the better ways to live. Those are the few people, the ones that actually go, I'm going to rewrite a lot of these agreements. And most of what adults do with each other with these hard conversations is, like you had said, they try to prove that I'm right. I'm going to prove to you that I'm right. And in doing so, I'm going to prove to you that you're wrong. And that's what I have to do first, is prove that you're wrong, for you to understand that I'm right, and then you'll accept my belief. And that's the other thing, is one of the greatest lies that people believe that gets in the way of communication is believing that if you understood me, you'd agree with me. That's not true. I can understand you and disagree with you at the same time, and vice versa. You can fully understand me. You can seek to understand me without actually giving into agreeing with me.
Yeah.
And that allows you to have real, deep, honest communication and conversation. And that's the first part of self-mastery that people have to change in themselves if this is going to move forward. If we're going to stop having this division in this country, we have to start with that first thing, which is I can understand you and lovingly seek to understand you without ever saying that I have to agree with you, and vice versa. Yeah. You don't have to agree with me for us to be civil and understand and love each other.
Absolutely. We say a lot that people become the person they are either because of their circumstances or despite their circumstances. It's their choice what that is, right? Like you said, that double down. Are they going to double down and say, no, what I was taught is right and that's it, right? You become the person you are because you're choosing to agree with what you were taught early on. Or do you become who you are because you go against that a little bit? And again, it's not about aligning 100% with one specific thing or one specific theory. And I think that's another big piece that we're talking about now a lot, especially in politics, is the idea of, I believe in the Democratic beliefs, or I believe in the Republican beliefs, and that's what we go with. Instead of saying, let's look at all of the concepts, let's look at the people, let's look at the values, let's look at the platform. It's, this is my party, this is who I am. And I know that was part of our conversation last time, is it's not about a party. It's about who is the best person, who is going to adhere to the values or the agreements of myself that I would feel is a strong representation of what will help the country or the city or the state get to the level that we need it to be at.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. And I'm going to point this out. So that first person that you talked about, the one that is stuck in their beliefs and proving that their beliefs are right, they are the cause of the angst that we are going through as a society right now. They are the ones that stick to party lines strictly and refuse to see who people really are and vote for who's best. I make this kind of a joke all the time, but it's true. Almost every person I know that voted for Biden didn't actually vote for Biden. They voted against Trump. They voted because they hated the orange guy. They hated the guy that made mean tweets. They hated the guy, so they voted for Biden. And honestly, if you step back and done a logical view on who Biden really was as a human, who he had been and proven himself to be, you never would have voted for the guy. That's my personal belief. You would. So many people were, I will never vote Republican, so I will always vote for whoever the Democrat is. I mean, if Biden had ever really wanted to fix any of the problems, the dude had 50 plus years in Congress. Why didn't he fix any of the problems then? You know what I mean? Like, look at people's track records, look at people as who they are and what they can accomplish. You know, even Trump, I don't know if I'd ever like the guy. I don't know if him and I would ever be friends. I think he's arrogant. He had a proven track record of business, and that's why I voted for him. But people won't have these conversations. And I have some good friends that stopped being good friends simply because of politics. It makes no sense to me. I understand it, but I don't agree with that way of thinking.
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of that on social media, specifically of people being unfriended or even families being broken apart.
Yeah.
We have seen more divide in politics in the last 10 to 12 years than we have seen in a very long time. I don't know. I mean, from my personal lived experiences, this is definitely the most tumultuous time politically. Now,
They,
were there other political times that were more tumultuous before my life? Maybe, but I've not seen it in history books, right? So I know that right now what we're experiencing is extremely different from what so many people have experienced. And we're actually doing a series on the election, how to navigate the election.
yeah.
And it's been really interesting because the whole point of the series is how to have conversations, how to talk to people who have different viewpoints than yourself, how to vote for what aligns with you as a person. And we're not telling people who to vote for, who not to vote for. We're saying, here's what this ticket believes in, here's what this ticket believes in, here's their platform. Which one resonates with you? How do you dive deeper into those conversations to figure out who your best candidate is or who
Right.
your best ticket is? And it's been interesting because on social media, we're getting a lot of pushback. People assuming that we're advocating for one party or we're advocating for another party, and there's no mention anywhere across the board. Now, if you look at what we do, people make assumptions,
Yeah.
right? Because we're a social justice company, people are making assumptions. At the same time, I will tell you that there are people on my team who are very pro in different areas. We have people across the spectrum because, again, as an organization, I value diversity of thought. And if I didn't value diversity of thought, then why am I in this work trying to advocate for people to have diversity of thought?
Thank
So
you.
I have people on my team who are from all different walks of life, who have very different belief systems, and we all come together and share the common purpose and mission of helping people to understand themselves so that then after they've done that self-reflection work, they can work on society.
Yeah.
But it's only once we've done that.
Well, it's funny because when we did the first podcast together, I was in the middle of my race, my campaign for mayor of Surprise. And when I told people that I was doing this podcast, and they're like, "What? They're a social justice company? Are you crazy? Like, you're conservative. Why are you doing that? They're gonna like blindside you, and I bet you they're gonna do this, and they're gonna make you look bad, and they're gonna re-edit it and make it." And I'm like, no. No, we got to have these conversations. This company isn't like that, and you personally, I know that you're not like that. So I was excited to do it. And I love that you're doing a thing about the elections because, again, I just went through the elections and it was such a fascinating study of people because there's people literally. So I've done a lot in my community. I've done a lot more than most people. And that's not me bragging. That's just the way it was. And a lot of people, they didn't know everything that I had done. But there were people, because I jumped in as a write-in because honestly, I was the better choice than the two candidates that were running. They're not bad people, but I have way more experience, larger network. I had a lot that I brought to the table that neither of them could. And I had people who literally, I've paid their mortgages to keep them from losing their homes. I've paid car payments to help them keep their cars. This is multiple people who were working on the other campaigns. Because I came in so late, they'd already been working on the other people's campaigns. And these are people that I have literally been there for through some of their roughest times over the last decade. These people turned ugly. I mean, ugly. They have this idea that politics are that in order to root for one person, you have to hate the other person that's running and you have to attack them. And so here are people that I have served at very deep and very personal levels, just turning ugly, attacking me on social media, lying about me and who I am. And I've learned years ago not to take things like that personally, but I said it was fascinating because it refined my life and it refined my circle of influence by far. But yeah, until we stop fighting and choose to have these real conversations with love and acceptance, then we're not going to get anything accomplished. And privilege is one of those very big hot topics on both sides. Where I think people, instead of having the conversations, double down and stop listening.
Yeah. And I think it really comes down to, you can say that there are some groups who have experienced some form of privilege, or people within those groups who have experienced some form of privilege, right? I think that's probably the more general term, is there are some people within certain groups who may have experienced privilege because of that group. But instead of saying that it's everyone, right?
Yes, and I like that you said that there are some people that may have, but then if we're going to agree on that point, then we have to agree that we can't group people together. And that
Absolutely.
you can't say, like, honestly, I think we should, everyone needs to stop using the term white privilege. I think it's a racist term. When you group someone and judge them based on the color of their skin, it's racism, whether it's against white people, black people, brown people, green people, I don't care. It's racism when you group and judge an entire group of people based on their skin color. And if we're going to stop racism and bigotry, we have to stop it all across the board. Not use it so that one group gets more special privileges to try and bring them up, but we need to stop it all the way across the board.
And I agree that we need to stop it. My thought with that is we need to recognize where people have started because of the origination of our country, right? So looking at what advantages people have had over the years.
So the idea has there been racism? Is there still racism in America? Absolutely. Has there been privilege? Is there still privilege in America? To certain degrees, absolutely it is. But to, again, group a whole group of people into one thing and say, now, I had a really rough life as a kid. I grew up, we started out really poor, but I had a very hardworking dad that created his own wealth and was an inspiration for me to go and create my own as well. My father never gave me a penny. When I was homeless, living in a car, my father gave me advice, he gave me encouragement, but he let me build my own strength and build my own wealth. Does that make sense? I didn't have any generational wealth.
Right.
Today.
There are access to the societal perception of people. So, for example, with white privilege, I can go into a store, shop anywhere. I don't get any odd looks. I don't get followed around, any of that. I can go to the same store with my son the very next day, who is a black man in America, and we are followed around the store. So the exact same store, the only difference is that I have a black male with me.
With you, right.
So that is my personal experience of what I see as privilege. I don't get ever. So another example, self-checkout. We go to self-checkout. It's big in a lot of stores now, right?
Sure.
When I do self-checkout by myself, I have never once been checked with my receipt or my cart. Every time my son goes to the grocery store with me, there's only been one time that we have not been checked. Every other time, if my son is with me, my receipt is checked.
Okay.
Another example. I'm sorry.
No, and so the way you interpret that is it's because he's black. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but that's how you
That's the difference, right? That's the difference in the situation. Another example of this is when I'm driving. I like to drive fast. My nickname is Danica for Danica Patrick. I like to drive fast. I get pulled over quite a bit. I have only gotten, I think, 3 tickets in my life. Every single one of those tickets was when my son was in the car.
Okay.
I have never gotten a ticket when I've been by myself. So, whatever that reason might be. But again, those are just some examples of the only thing is that my son was in the car with me as a black man.
Sure.
Or a black child.
So I'm in an MC, motorcycle club. It's an actual MC, 3 patches on the back. When I ride my motorcycle and I wear my cut every time I ride, and I get pulled over by a police officer, every single time that police officer walks up with his hand on his gun. And it's now the motorcycle club that I'm in is firefighters. It's a nationwide, actually we're an international MC of all firefighters. We're not 1%ers. We are one of the most giving charitable organizations in the MC world. And there's a lot of great MCs out there, but there is a stigma that follows MCs because of what happened in the past and stereotypes that are placed on people that ride with 3 patches on their back. I can't be mad at the police officer for always walking up with his hand on his gun, because statistically, if you look at statistics, that's what they've been faced with. I'm not saying it's right, because it's not, but I can understand that. One of the good conversations that happened on the Facebook post was a buddy of mine that I've known since high school. You've got to go back and read it, because it's it gave me another perspective, because there's so many different ways that people are biased against for one reason or another. Now, Anthony had hair in high school all the way down to his butt since high school, right? He talked about how he goes, I can understand how black men feel sometimes, because every time I got pulled over, I got searched for drugs. Because back in high school, I was long hair, listened to hardcore rock and roll, I'm a guitar player, you know, the whole, he goes, so I understand it to an extent. I may not understand exactly what they go through because it's based on their skin, but it is based on how they look.
Right.
So how are you going to deal with that? You know what I mean? So how do we overcome that, though? How do we overcome the idea that in the past this is the way it was, and see it in a new light today?
And I think it's the idea of we've all been socialized to have these certain ideas or stereotypes, right? We've been socialized to think that.
Yep.
And the ultimate question is we need to go back to the beginning of why is that the case, right? Because let's put an example of school to prison pipeline, right? The prison system is predominantly people of color, male, right? So that is the number one identity group in our prison system right now. So are we saying that Black people are inherently worse people? No. So if that's not the case, then what is it that is causing our prison systems to not be representative of our general society or demographic?
And this is a great conversation. We could do a whole series of podcasts on this, because it's not, and we cannot just say it's one problem. And that, or there's
absolutely one. But we need to understand who was it at the top of that who said, hey, let's target this group of people, right?
Let me ask you this.
How were those decisions there?
And to me, that's not the important part as to who did it, right? It's nice to know who did it and nice to know why, but what's more important is that once you understand that that's what happened, what are you going to do about it as a Black man? What are you going to do about it as a Black woman? What are you going to do about it as part of your Black culture? Once you realize that there are people out there who want to keep you down, well, what do? Well, first off, and here's a truth that if we're going to fix anything, it has to be absolutely changed. This is a truth. This has to be a belief that people live, because they won't be able to change if they don't. You will never, ever legislate away issues of the heart and mind, ever. You cannot pass enough laws. You cannot make enough policies within companies that will ever change the hearts and minds. This has to be something that's done on an individual level and then ripples out to those that are within your circle.
Absolutely.
And then they have to do the same thing.
And I would say, in addition to, you said, as a Black man, as a Black woman, as a white man, as a white woman, what are we going to do? Because I think it needs to be not just the identity group who's impacted by it, because all of us are impacted by it, right? All of us, as a white presenting female, I am impacted by racism in this country, because when my fellow man is hurt, when my fellow human is hurt, I am hurt, right? So for me personally, this is a personal issue, not just on the business level, but also on the personal level of it needs to be all of us taking a look at this and saying, what can all of us do to try and uplift and empower so that there's not one group who is treated in a negative way, knowing that this is how we've all been socially raised. This is how we've all been kind of accustomed, and we've shifted. I mean, there's been so many shifts, even in my lifetime, of how we see different groups. But we need to have these conversations to be able to say, where did that come from? Where is this? Why is this like this? And like you said, the most important part, what are we going to do about it?
So I love go from topic to topic here.
I know, right? We started with privilege and we started with that concept. And I think a lot of what we've talked about kind of comes back to that idea, though, too. It's what do people have access to, right? Because privilege is about access. It's about opportunity. It's about what's available to people and societal perception. I think the biggest thing for me when I think about privilege is societally perceived privilege, right? And it's how society sees someone, then certain granted access is provided in some cases.
So let me ask you this. So with the amount of money that when I was married, my wife and I made, when my kids began to apply for colleges, they had a hard time because, one, we made decent money, and two, they were white. there were other applications for people that were way less qualified than them that were allowed to be accepted simply because the universities were trying to make their quota. So now tell me who's actually receiving privileges there.
Honestly, I don't think either group was receiving a privilege. I think that the groups that you're saying because the colleges wanted diversity in their business, in their colleges, it's not just about diversity of identity, it's about diversity of experiences. And I personally believe that I would rather our children go to a college that has a wide variety of people than just a specific group of people.
And
So I would prefer a diverse experience.
and that's a great thing to prefer. There's nothing wrong with that. And
Mm-hmm.
it'd be great if colleges actually offered that on their own free will, because then you
Mm-hmm.
could choose which college really cares about that and which one's just trying to meet the federal quotas that they were
Right.
handed. And again, this is back to when legislation forces people to be what they're really not. But I disagree with you. I think it
Mm-hmm.
is a privilege being handed to minority groups, that they are given preferential treatment on applications, on grants, on a whole bunch of other things that white people aren't. And to me, that's
Yeah.
racism. When you give one group, because based on their ethnicity, a leg up, I think that's racism. And
See, I think it's instead of a leg up, I think it's helping to level out what has been experienced over the years. And I think it's providing access to things that certain groups have not been given access to for multiple generations that does impact
well,
that.
but is that really happening now?
What do you
I
mean?
mean, because the biggest argument I hear for why privilege, or these privileges should exist, especially in law, was for things that happened generations ago. Why
Because
should
I
I
think
be
that
accountable?
generationally, anything that's happened generationally still is a ripple effect today. So, how your grandparents were raised impacts how you were raised because they're the ones who are part of your raising, right? So it
Sure.
ripples into generations to come. And I think this gets into a whole other topic. We've had like 75 other topics come up, but generational trauma is also something that you can harness, at least I believe, in the work that I do and in some of my own personal
Sure.
self-growth, that there is generational trauma living in all of us from our ancestors of people that we've never even met, but that's something that I believe in.
But
So
you hit it on the head though. Whose responsibility is it to handle the generational trauma?
it's our responsibility as
Yours.
individuals.
Yours.
Absolutely.
It's not my
And it's the job of
responsibility.
society to provide opportunities for us to do that.
Okay, well, so in here, I agree with that. Well, kind of. I agree that opportunities are out there. Okay,
Hmm.
opportunities are provided. There are plenty of opportunities. There is nothing that a black man nowadays can't have the opportunity to have that I didn't also have the opportunity to have. It's actually equal out there. I believe it's absolutely equal out there. Now, is there certain things that I have that someone else might not have? Sure. I had a dad that started out, we had a really rough life when we were kids, but I watched my father work his tail off, dedicate and sacrifice a ton of time and effort towards his education, towards his work, towards promotions, towards learning a craft that he mastered and became one of the best in the world at. That was a privilege that I had, not a white privilege. It was a privilege that I had to have a man in the house that showed me what it was like to work like that.
Hmm.
Someone else might not have that privilege. It's not a white thing. It's not a black thing. It's just a thing.
Right.
Um, I don't owe that. I don't think we should legislate or that society has the responsibility to try and provide that for someone else simply because they don't have it. Equal opportunity is out there. And I think where the confusion happens is where we try to legislate and guarantee equal outcome, which you
Hmm.
cannot do. It is an
Right.
impossibility that you will ever. And I'll give you a great example of that. So the minimum wage, we had a bunch of Californians move here to Arizona. They voted for a minimum wage to go through the roof. I owned a restaurant at the time, and every year for years, I had to give almost $1 an hour raise for a long
Yeah.
time. It's killing the economy, but that's another whole topic. So every January 1st, my employees got a really big raise. And in February, one of my best employees came to me and he goes, "Hey, Mr. Cunningham, can we talk?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's up, Brian?" And he goes, I'm never late. I'm always early. I'm one of the hardest workers that you have. I never call out sick. I do my best to help train other people, blah, blah, blah. He gave me all these amazing things that he does. And I agree with every one of them. He's one of my absolute best employees. And he goes, can I get a raise? And I said, well, Brian, I just gave you one. And he goes, when? And I go, January 1st. And he goes, well, no, that was a minimum wage increase. I go, yeah, it was $1 an hour increase to your wage. And he goes, well, that's not fair because Josh got the same increase. Mm-hmm. I go, yeah. And he goes, Josh doesn't even do half of what I do. And I go, I agree. It's wrong. And he goes, yeah. And I said, I go, this is the problem with trying to legislate equality of outcome. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, I've been legislated now because of this socialist mentality mindset that I have to pay Josh, who's worth half of what you are, the same wage as you. And because of that, I can't pay you what you're worth. I would pay you $16, $17, $18 an hour because you do the work of 3 employees. I would gladly pay you what you're worth, but I can't because I can't afford it because I have to pay Josh, who does half the work that you do, the same way. I said, now that's where trying to legislate equality of outcome gets in the way of equality of opportunity. Does that make sense? And he goes, yeah. And then he goes, well, why am I working so hard then? And I go, again, this is why socialism will never work, because those that are producers start to lose their motivation to work so hard because, well, I don't have to work so hard to get the same amount of money. This guy doesn't work at all and he gets the same money I do. Why should I work so hard? And production stops. And that's why every socialist and communist country on the planet has failed. And we are dangerously getting towards that. And one of the ways that the elites that are in Congress as career politicians are pushing us towards that is by segregating us, creating victim mentality within people. And when people accept that victim mentality and say, well, other people have it better than me, it's not fair, I should take it from them so that I can have it, it should be guaranteed to me and taken from them and handed to me, it begins to take away that self-work that you and I both agree has to be done if we're going to solve these issues. They go, oh, I could just vote for this person and they'll legislate it away from me. I don't have to actually do the self-work to get to the point where I'm an empowered enough person that I can take advantage of these opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to kind of wrap up on, because if that story resonated with you, I know that you shared that story in our first recording as well. So we're going to put the link to that first recording down below. If you want to be a part of continued conversations, this is just one example of a conversation between 2 people who see things a little bit differently and still want to learn from one another and hear and share those experiences and have those conversations. Our goal, both of our goal, I believe, is to truly help people understand that it starts with ourselves. Yes. We have to do the work ourselves. We have to look in the mirror. We have to be willing to do that before we start pointing the finger and blaming others for what's happening in our society. We need to be able to do the work one-on-one first. Amen. So thank you so much for joining today, Ed. Thank you everyone for listening. And we look forward to many, many more conversations.
Thank you. And hey, yeah, if anybody wants to, find the conversation on Facebook, on my profile, Ed Cunningham. It's a public profile. Would love to hear more people get into the conversation, because there's a lot of people that are already in there that would benefit from other people's views. Please do.
Right. Thank you so much, Ed. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.